So, moving on to mistake number 2 that common landlords make, and that is not running adequate screening of a potential tenant. Oh my goodness, I can have a whole day seminar on this topic. So I'm going to have to try to trim this down and just going to get the facts on this one. By far, landlords have the most problems with tenants and complaints about tenants just because the landlords do not do proper screening on their tenants. They do not have certain qualifications, certain levels of standards that they require tenants to meet before they can move into their properties. So this is one of the very first things in the veteran landlord that we try to teach people in our management section is just make sure that your tenant qualifications and your screening and your qualifications for renting are high enough that they're going to be able to cover you and get the quality of the tenant that you want in your particular property. The better you do at this part, the easier managing your property is going to be. Please believe me on that. The better you do at tenant selection, the easier it is to be a landlord. Now, if you're a landlord out there and you're watching this, you're certainly going to understand that having a great tenant is just like, you never get a call, you never get a complaint from a tenant. Everything's fine. If something goes wrong, the tenant fixes it. They just take care of it. They don't bother you. And it's like they just send you the money every month. That's an ideal tenant. You're like, wow, I forgot to even own that property because I haven't heard from the person in so long, and everything's been going great. So tenant selection is a huge deal. So some of the things I would advise you for, get your qualifications. If you're going to do this yourself, okay, if you're not going to do it yourself, which I don't ever recommend people do their own tenant screening, just because there's some other liabilities and things like that with fair housing. Without having to get into that you have to make sure that you repeat the same process over and over again in case somebody ever accuses you of discriminating against them for whatever reason. So I would just kind of recommend handing that off to a tenant screening company and having them do all of that, because then the liability is on them to kind of get that stuff done. But even the tenant screening company is going to have certain standards. They're going to come back and say yes or no, or they're going to say, this person may be a high risk. So, but at least they are keeping everybody to the same level of standards that they would expect would qualify as a good tenant. So, just simply, one of the primary things that we look at when we're qualifying tenants is just how much money do they make. You know what I mean? How much money do they make regarding the rent? If you're renting some place that has $1,000 a month, if somebody only makes $1,500 a month, that person is not going to be a good tenant for you because they're going to struggle every single month. You can't make $1,500 a month and pay $1,000 of that. That's 66% of their income on their rent. There's no way they're going to be able to afford to live and pay for food, utilities, and everything else. So typically, you're in the 3 to 4 times the monthly rent range. That's kind of where you're looking to have a tenant put in there for that. But when you screen a tenant, obviously besides just making enough money, there are other things that you want to check. You want to do a background check. You want to do a credit check on them. You want to make sure they pay their bills, things like that. You want to make sure, depending on if they have a criminal background or they're in the sex offender database and things like that. Those are all things that you need to check up on to just make sure that you understand the type of tenant that you're putting in there. So let me look here at just some of my other notes. So number one, when you're screening a tenant here, one of the primary things that I use to filter people out like this is really an application fee. So if you are a landlord and you ever tell people that they need to fill out an application and the application is going to cost money and people don't want to pay that, or they give you any slack whatsoever about paying an application fee, that's like a red flag for me. That's like, okay, no thank you. Everybody who rents an apartment knows that there's going to be an application fee because they're going to fill something out and it's going to cost money to go out and run these reports to get a background check on them. Now, if they have nothing to hide and they're a good tenant, excuse me, they're going to know they're going to need to pay for this. And they have no problem with you checking it because they're actually wanting you to check it because they know what you're going to find on there. So definitely finding a good screening company. Now, if you do this yourself, I would have to recommend there's several other things. We actually have some training on our YouTube channel that goes over self-screening. But again, I don't recommend it. It is a lot more work, and you can hand all of this off to somebody else and have them deal with all of this, and because it's not really a big moneymaker on this one here. So again, finding a good screening company. So just real quick about that, if you ever want to find a local company, which I always like to do local, because local they kind of know more things about your area than a national company would. So just put, go to Google or Yahoo or Bing, whatever you use, and just type in your city, and then just type in like your city, San Francisco property management. I'm sorry, San Francisco tenant screening. Sorry. So San Francisco tenant screening, see what pops up and find some of the local areas. A lot of times, what's even going to be better is that these people will have applications that are online that you can actually include as a link in your marketing. So potentially people can fill out an application before they even do anything. Because if your property is really hot, and meaning it's just really desirable, then people are going to want to fill out an application to be first in line before they go look at it and then fill out an application only to find out somebody else has an application in front of them. So make sure you apply your standards on these. And tenant screening is one of the biggest headaches. If you don't do this, you will potentially have huge problems throughout the entire year dealing with them, and then you're going to want to potentially get out of the business. These people could do other things, and I can't tell you some of the nightmare stories I've heard. If you're out there and you have these nightmare stories, I'm sorry. I've been there too, so I feel you on that one.